Authentic leadership is really a broad topic. Like when you think about the word authenticity, things like honesty and ethics and integrity all come up. And the research around authenticity often settles into focus on values. Like, what are your personal values? What do you most care about as a leader? And the interesting twist in that domain is that the research shows that your own personal values as a leader are incredibly important. Like, it's worth doing some of the exercises that we have in the book around reflecting on your own values. But if you really want to have an impact on others, you need to pay attention to their values. The research shows that when a leader aligns his or her values with the values of the followers, that's when you have the biggest impact.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jay Scherr, host of Business Minds Coffee Chat, where you get a captivating look inside the minds of game changers, risk takers, and visionaries who turn ideas into breakthroughs that shake up the world. Our mission is to give you fresh ways to think that spark growth in your business and life so you can make a mark that lasts. I thought a good way to kick off the conversation, since you're an author, you're in the leadership space, a well-known coach, let's switch to a different type of writing here for just a moment. So if you were to write your autobiography, what would be an appropriate title for that book?
Oh, what a great question. I would say like bouncing back and bouncing ahead.
Ooh, bouncing back and bouncing ahead. Okay. So I can't let that one go. It's always interesting to me when I hear someone's title, when and if I ask that question, because it can be very telling, but it gives us an area to explore. So tell me more about that title and give me an example, if you will, of why that was the first thing that came to mind. A real world example from your life.
Well, yeah, that one caught me off guard, but it's a great question. And I think perhaps the reason it jumped into my mind to say bouncing back and bouncing ahead, or bouncing backwards and bouncing forwards, is that, like many, my career has not been a linear progression, up a steep curve. It's been forwards, backwards, around, circle, and definitely nonlinear. And I think it's safe to say that when I think about my success, I also think about how I've bounced back from what you might consider to be failures or setbacks.
Mm.
As an example, I became a psychologist, went back to school to get my PhD in psychology, partly because I was in a role at the time earlier in my career where I was a director of human resources for a major consulting firm. And I was asked to start coaching some of my colleagues, the partners. And I realized that I wasn't very good at it. I had the best of intentions, but I didn't necessarily have a lot of success. And it was a wake-up call to realize that I was already being asked in my success to do something that I really wasn't prepared for. So, I then stepped out of my corporate role, went back to school to get my PhD, and actually learn about the psychological background that I needed in order to have the skill set to actually work effectively with executives. So that's one, and, sort of wasn't good at coaching until I decided to get training in the psychology space. The second version of that is that once I got a PhD in psychology, I thought, oh, well, in that case, I'm now skilled. I should become a psychotherapist. So I went ahead and got licensed and worked as a counselor for a few years. But I also came to realize that I didn't really enjoy that either. There were things about it I loved. I have a lot of respect for the psychologists, the therapists that I worked with, obviously for the patients that I had the opportunity to work with. But I relatively early on in my experience as a counselor, I recognized that I was very goal oriented. I had worked in results oriented corporations as a director of HR, and that I really wasn't that well suited to be a therapist. So I don't know that it was a failure, but it was kind of like a decision, a setback to say, oh, you wanted to become a therapist and now you decided that's not really what you want to do. The long story is that ultimately then I decided to segue into coaching. And I feel like I found my home. And I love leadership coaching. I love working with executives. I love working with teams. But as you can tell, it was a bit of a circuitous route. And so that's probably what I mean by bouncing back and bouncing ahead.
Well, what I love about what you just shared, which I think is certainly relatable for many of us that are listening to this conversation, is the point that you made when you first started to talk about this, that life and your career isn't linear. And there's going to be those peaks, those valleys, the ups and downs, the roadblocks we run into. And when that happens, which certainly will as we move through life, it's what do we do next, right? What are the actions that we take? Are we going to let that hold us back? Are we going to let that keep us from moving forward and really being able to move in a direction that aligns with what we want to be and who we want to become? Or are we going to figure out how to move through it? And clearly you've been able to adjust and experience different pivot areas of life, which have led you to where you are today. So let me ask you a question about when you were in the role as a therapist or counselor. What were you, if you can think back to that time, what would you say is one of the most significant learnings that you took away about yourself? What were you learning about yourself that you actually still carry with you today?
I think the biggest takeaway for me was that I am very action oriented. I'm very results oriented.
Okay.
It's part of the reason why I was successful early in my career as a corporate HR manager, which led me to then being asked to coach people and then realizing that I wasn't as equipped to it as I might have thought of. But working as a therapist is a wonderful choice for many people, and it's certainly a profound and positive contribution to helping people become healed and whole. So again, I don't have anything but positive things to say about that profession. But on the other hand, what I came to realize was that I was very goal oriented, and that therapy tends to be a longer term digging into your past and sort of digging up the traumas and working through, and incredibly valuable. But when one of my mentors, a supervisor in counseling, said to me, Jeff, one of your goals is to make your relationships with your patients last for like 10 years. I said, no, I don't think that's me. And not to say that that isn't incredibly valuable, but I really was very forward oriented, very action oriented. And that ultimately led me to coaching, because coaching is very forward thinking, and coaching is very focused on what do you want to change today to be better tomorrow. So I ultimately was better suited for coaching.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You know, it's so interesting. I don't know if you find this yourself, but in my coaching practice, so I'm a business performance coach working with leaders, teams, entrepreneurs, business owners, etc. I tend to incorporate a fair amount of psychology in the work that I do, although I certainly would never label myself a psychologist, but there's so much dealing with the mind and dealing with getting, well, let me back up for a second. I've felt through my own experience that until you can get the self right, until we can work on ourselves, it's difficult to be the best leader that we can be, the best business owner that we can be. And I always start with self and then grow from there. So that's where the psychology piece tends to come into play. What are your thoughts on that? Push back on me if you completely disagree from your
No, I
experience.
completely agree with you. Absolutely. I think that dovetails with not only the way I conduct my coaching practice, but also the way that my co-author Margaret Moore and I structured our new book, The Science of Leadership, which starts with conscious leadership. And the core of that is doing self-reflection to become more objective about yourself. And working with clients, I absolutely pull on my psychology training to look at how were you as an individual impacted by the system in which you were brought up, your family system, your teachers, people that have a lot of impact on you earlier in your life definitely impact the way you show up as a leader. So maybe there's a fine line in looking at someone's past, but I think it is absolutely valuable to see how you developed your blind spots or your triggers or what we call your shadow, to become more conscious and more aware of those things that might be tripping you up as a leader. And they often do trace back to childhood, adolescence, early career. And when you become aware of that and you say to yourself, oh my God, I realized that, my dad was X, Y, and Z, or I had a teacher that impacted me in a particular way. And ever since then, I do get triggered by something, or I do find that I'm anxious in certain situations. Becoming awake to it, becoming aware, helps you become more objective. And ultimately, then you're not under the control of that trigger. You become more integrated and able to make your own decisions about how you're going to react to situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I really love about your latest book, which of course we're going to dig into, but the journey, right? The natural journey, if you will, of a leader is the path or the framework that you follow in your book, starting with self. And I really appreciated that because it spoke to me in a way that other leadership books don't necessarily. And I really appreciate that. And we'll talk more about that here in a moment. But I wanted to stay on a personal note here for a moment. So when we talk about trauma, we talk about family systems, etc. When you think back over your life, I would love it if you would share with all of us one of the hardest things that you personally have overcome.
Wow.
Little psychology today.
Yeah. I think the thing that's probably the most profound for me that I don't talk about often, but I was adopted, and learning about that and finding my birth family during my adult years has had a profound impact on me, and recognizing that I was, how would I put it? I was probably psychologically disturbed early on to find out that I was adopted as a child. and it was a long journey in therapy, and then in searching for my birth family,
Mm.
to come to see the benefits of having my adopted family, coming to understand my birth family and all the history, and then coming to accept, the complexity of family dynamics. And actually then all the way around from, perhaps a little bit of shame from being adopted, like, because it's not something that we talk about often in the public sphere, but
Right.
coming all the way around from that to actually gratitude, to realize that I got the gifts of an incredible mixture of nature and nurture. And it took a long time for me to kind of sort of fully embrace that arc, but I think I have at this point in my life.
So, at what age were you when you found out that you were adopted?
I found out when I was 7.
And then at what age were you when you were able to connect with, or at least find out who your birth parents were?
That wasn't until my late 30s.
Late 30s.
Yeah,
Okay.
so there was a big gap. Um, and then part of the healing for me was the unique experience of graduating with my PhD and having both my birth mother and my adopted mother attend my graduation.
Oh, wow.
It was quite extraordinary. I was the
That
only
is
one at the
extraordinary.
PhD graduation with 2 mothers.
Amazing. That is quite something. That truly is. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. And it just I always find that there's more nuance and more of someone's story
Yeah.
that really adds to the the flavor of who that person is. And clearly that experience for you, to be able to go from feelings of shame to gratitude, that arc, and what you were experiencing and learning at the same time, really is quite extraordinary. And I think it's a great lesson for all of us, that no matter who we are, no matter what we may have accomplished, no matter what our titles are or
Right.
what our education is, we all have a story, and we all
Yeah.
have things that we've gone through. And the question is, what do you take away from it? Right? In your case, you've been able to attach gratitude, which I think is absolutely beautiful. And again, thank you for sharing that.
No, thank you for asking.
Yeah,
It was quite a
absolutely.
journey.
So, I can't even imagine. So you spend a significant amount of your time in the leadership and coaching space. You have coached leaders around the globe, hundreds of leaders. Talk to me about, for a couple moments or two, are there differences in, I want to think of the right way to frame the question. So when you're working with leaders in different countries, whether it's cultural differences or societal differences, does it make a difference to you in how you coach or the style of coaching? Maybe unpack that a little bit for me. I really want to understand the global side of your coaching.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think in general, I don't change my style of coaching
Mm-hmm.
depending upon where the client comes from in terms of their culture or their geography that they grew up, or there can be as much difference between different companies as there can be between different countries.
Mm.
I mean, each company that I work with, each leadership team that I work with has a different culture too. They have corporate culture, and then they have national culture, and then they have their language, and then they have all of their values that can be incredibly varied. So I would say I don't change my coaching style very much. What I do is try to listen deeply to what makes them unique. And when you're coaching, or when I'm coaching someone from, let's say, Korea or China, or the Middle East, as opposed to coaching someone from the US brought up in a North American environment. Their background may absolutely impact their value system, the way they see the role of a leader, how they interpret hierarchy, for example. So what I do as a coach is try to listen into what's unique about their perspective and how did they get to have that particular way of seeing, and honor that, rather than try to overlay my perspective. I think what makes a good coach is the listening skills and being able to honor and appreciate the differences. So I think probably my psychology training is helpful there, because good therapists try to step back and really focus on how the patient or the client shows up, what's unique about them, and how do we dig in with curiosity to learn about them. And that would be my approach to coaching as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So you have said that we are in a post-heroic era of leadership. I think I've got that right.
Right.
Would you tell us more about that, and why is it critical in your experience for today's leaders to understand that?
Well, you're referring to the content of my last book, which was called Flex, The Art and Science of Leadership in a Changing World. And I think I'm getting a sunshine on me, unfortunately. The sun is going down here. Sorry.
No worries.
For those of you that are watching this on video, I'm getting sunset, so it'll go away hopefully soon. I had in my coaching practice an opportunity to do research with a large number of coaches on how what they were coaching leaders on has evolved over the last few years. And one of the major shifts that the coaches were seeing, and I was also seeing in my practice, was this move away from the what I call the heroic sort of white knight on a stallion kind of leader, where everyone looks to a authoritative approach, and a movement more toward a collaborative, consensus building style of leadership. And at the same time, there are certainly moments, especially in emergencies or when really important strategic decisions need to be made, or when something's urgent, where an authoritative, like a heroic style, is appropriate. But over time, from when I started as an HR director, and we taught leadership in a way that, you want to develop your type A personality, and you want to be directive, you want to be bossy, you want to make decisions, you want to have a vision, you want to carry out your vision as the boss. I mean, over time, that's become less of the style of leader that brings out the best in others, brings innovation. The style of leader that is adaptive to really being curious and collaborative and trying to get other people to engage is more successful, I think, in today's world where innovation is really important. So there has been a shift, and I call it the post-heroic leader, someone who's flexible, really, and adaptable to the situation that they're in.
Well, I appreciate the clarification on that. And as you look around the landscape, the leadership landscape today, and those leaders that you study, do you still see those heroic type leaders in organizations? Do you still see a significant number of them? Or do you really feel that shift has occurred from that heroic type, I'm the one coming on the white horse, to a more collaborative, consensus building, leading with curiosity. What are you seeing today?
I think it's probably a both and
Both
situation.
and.
Um,
Okay.
I would say I still see authoritative type A, directive type leaders in my practice, and they can be very successful. But I think I see more agility and more recognition that uh, strategic engagement with their staff and with their colleagues is really incredibly valuable and empowering, especially with the new generations coming up, the millennials and then the Gen Zs. Those younger folks are really looking to have a say. They want to have a voice, and they have a lot of creativity and great ideas. So the most successful leaders are those that can pull on that authoritative style when they need it. They can be directive when it's called for, but they have the flexibility to recognize that if they want to have creativity on their team, they don't just consider themselves to be the only source of it. They look for their people to also step up and speak up and feel empowered. So I do think that the type A directive, heroic leaders are still out there, and some of them are very entrepreneurial, and they're incredibly impactful. But I think there's a shift taking place, and more leaders are becoming more broader in their capacities, which is one of the reasons why my co-author and I wrote this book, because the research shows that is more effective ultimately.
Yeah, which is very powerful. And I love the fact that you mentioned the ability to adapt and agility, right? So you can be both, and the type A when it's appropriate, right? But then the collaborative and listening and taking ideas, and everyone's voice matters, and creating a safe space, and all the things that we've learned that are the most effective ways to lead and to create culture. It to have that ability to be both,
Right.
when appropriate, I think is very powerful. So speaking of your latest book, The Science of Leadership. So this is a book that you wrote with your co-author, Margaret Moore, and it's The Science of Leadership: 9 Ways to Expand Your Impact. And, I mentioned to you that one of the things that I really appreciate about this book is the way that it is not only structured, but also your ability to take science, research, which sometimes can be very heady,
Right.
yet you've been able to distill it and really make the research itself, I would say, accessible and practical, right? Something that we can actually sink our teeth into and begin to apply immediately. So for that, I really appreciate the way that you've written the book, and I certainly have gotten a lot out of it. So what I would love for us to do here is, we're not going to be able to go through every single detail and specifics around all the 9 different ways that you can expand your impact. But what I would like to do is first to just to give us a little bit of background and context around how the book came to be, because you and your co-author, you distilled a tremendous amount of research and studies. So tell us a little bit about that, so we understand the magnitude of what was involved in bringing this book to life.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I mean, the first thing you have to recognize is that Margaret and I are not researchers ourselves. So we are affiliated through our Institute of Coaching with Harvard, but we are not academics, really. We're coaches. And what we had been doing even before this book was translating research and the science of coaching for the membership of the Institute of Coaching, where there's almost 5,000 members. So we had been in the practice for years of taking academic research around coaching and translating it into practice for coaches. And what we came to recognize in the last few years is that coming out of the pandemic really was the impetus for realizing that leaders could also benefit from knowing more about the academic research around effective leadership, and that most of that academic work is kind of locked up in the academic journals. Not very many leaders have the time, the energy, or the wherewithal to read academic studies around effective leadership. And so we had been translating the coaching research. So we realized that it would be beneficial to translate the leadership research. And so we embarked on basically a deep dive into reviews, leadership studies, all over the world. I think there's leadership studies from 22 countries that we summarized in this book. And then when we stepped back from looking at over 15,000 research articles, we didn't necessarily read all 15,000, but we did read meta-analysis, where they take a particular topic like servant leadership or authentic leadership, and then they summarize all the different studies. And we realized that there was like a natural evolution of the research into these 9 capacities. And before you know it, we started to frame it up as like, these are the 9 areas that people have done the academics have done a lot of research. Let's try to summarize that. And so as we started working on the proposal and the structure, it also became very clear to us that it was like a journey. That, as you said earlier in your earlier question, you start with the self. And conscious leadership became the ground. And then the rest of the 9 capacities flowed out of that. And it became kind of a natural evolution that we encourage readers and coaches that work with leaders to work through, basically to develop all the skills over time that you would need to be a truly whole, effective leader, with all of those capacities or all of those skills available to you at any given time. Servant leadership, shared leadership, positive leadership, transformational leadership. You can't do them all at once.
Sure.
But depending upon the situation and depending upon your development as a leader, you ultimately do want to potentially have them all in your toolkit.
So let's do this then. I think a good way to give our audience some exposure to this is, let's follow the arc of the book. So as we move from self to others to a system, if you could maybe take us from self and just maybe mention the capabilities that would fall under each, and let's take one capability and give an example of that, because again, the way that the book is written is it really is from a coach's mindset, which I truly appreciate, but I know many of those that are watching and listening will as well. So let's do that. So let's start with self, the capabilities, and then let's take one and give an example.
Well, as you mentioned, the book is structured sort of in a Venn diagram of 9 capacities, the journey from conscious leadership all the way to transformational leadership. And then so that might be the vertical, and then the horizontal is the 3 levels. So self, as you mentioned, the first 3 capacities are all related to who you are as a leader. They might, in the traditional vernacular, be considered the traits, of a leader. And then you move outward. So the second 3 are other focused. You're dealing with other people as a leader. So it's your team, and your organization and then your relationships. And then finally, when you become more sophisticated as a leader, you need to step back and think of it as a system. So it's self, other, and system.
Okay.
And the first three within the self domain are conscious leadership, which we talked about briefly, authentic leadership, and agile leadership. And we've already talked a little bit about agile because we talked about pivoting, right? And the research into agility I wrote about in my last book, Flex. And so the one we haven't mentioned is authentic. And authentic leadership is really a broad topic. Like when you think about the word authenticity, things like honesty and ethics and integrity all come up. And the research around authenticity often settles into focus on values. Like, what are your personal values? What do you most care about as a leader? And the interesting twist in that domain is that the research shows that your own personal values as a leader are incredibly important. Like, it's worth doing some of the exercises that we have in the book around reflecting on your own values. But if you really want to have an impact on others, you need to pay attention to their values. The research shows that when a leader aligns his or her values with the values of the followers, that's when you have the biggest impact. So it's not about just foisting your values onto others. It's about knowing your own, understanding what's most important to you, and then listening and exploring what is valuable for the people that work for me or work with me. And then how do we align those? And that's what will bring about the greatest impact. So authenticity has a lot of different components, but the core is really knowing your values and aligning your values with others.
Okay, perfect. All right. So as we move from self to others, let's talk about the capabilities that would fall under others.
So others, you move very logically from agility into relational leadership. And relational leadership can be summarized as we summarize it as helping. And the broader distinctions around helping are coaching, listening, empathy, psychological safety, creating a culture of connectivity with your people. And the research shows that those leaders that really understand those distinctions around being a good listener and doing coaching with your people, not just directing, are the most successful. So relational, and then what did I say after that? Positive leadership,
So yeah.
and then compassionate leadership.
And compassionate
Are the three that are kind of what I would call the team-oriented leadership capacities. And positive is pulled from the research in positive psychology, which focuses on things like efficacy, competence, the self-determination theory, which the researchers have demonstrated is what's the core of motivation, which is relatedness, competence, and having a sense of meaning or fulfillment. And those are what creates a sense of optimism in a leadership environment, and also comes with things like gratitude and appreciation. So there's sort of key components of positive leadership. And I would say, and you asked me to give us some examples, I mean, it's also not about always being positive, right? So we have a story in the book about someone who's almost one of my leadership clients who was almost too positive. Like, they were always trying to be upbeat, even though they were burning out in their role. So, you can be too much positive. So it's also about being realistic. And also, people can see through positivity if it's not real, if it's not transparently valid. And so, for example, in this case study, the individual that I was coaching was extremely well-intentioned and wanting to have a positive environment, but she was burning out and people could see it. So her positivity was actually not connecting with people because it didn't come across as real. She came across as exhausted. So once she realized that she needed to get real and take care of herself, then her positivity could flow back into being shared with integrity, and people started to trust her again. So we just want to be clear that it's not about constant positivity. It's about using the positive attributes in a way that people resonate with integrity. And then the final of the three is compassionate leadership. And this is an area relatively new in leadership research, but it's really powerful. And we describe it in the book as resonating with the broader team, with the broader scope of your responsibilities as a leader. And when we use the word resonate, we mean almost beyond empathy. Like empathy is sort of putting yourself in other people's shoes and listening to where they're coming from. Compassion is really having more of a heart space for understanding that life is not always easy. Like there's pain and suffering, and to have a willingness to be present in the face of someone going through a really difficult time, someone having a loss in their family, or even an organizational setback, recognizing that people are going to be in pain, that it's going to be hurting. And to have compassion for that is like a more open space. And the research shows that when people in leadership roles can be vulnerable and share their compassionate connection with the people they work with, they have even more impact. So those are the team-oriented or organizational-oriented. Shall I stop there, or do you want to keep going?
So I would love to keep going, but there's a question that I have as I go back to something that we were talking about before, and that is with the heroic type leader, right?
Right.
The A-type leader. And I'm thinking about this journey, right, that we're talking about right now, in getting to becoming a compassionate leader. Talk to me just a bit through your own experience, what that process is like to take someone from the heroic type leader to where they can become more heart-led and compassionate and caring. Not that they're not caring, but to be able to really have conversations with your teams and talk about these things, because this isn't something that we were doing years ago. I mean, I remember when I first got into business and my first corporate job, it was the more heroic type leadership,
Right.
and this didn't exist. And if it did, then it would have been very rare. So just talk about that transition and that going through those different stages and where you tend to have the most success with a leader. And can any leader learn how to take each of these 9 capabilities and actually integrate them into their own lives and into their own leavership?
Yeah.
Can anyone?
I absolutely believe they can.
Okay.
And the research shows that when a leader can exhibit compassion, can demonstrate a sense of compassion for others and for his or her people, the level of commitment that they will engage with people, the level of engagement with others starts to elevate very quickly. And the source of that from a coaching perspective goes back to conscious leadership. Like when you explore how you became successful, and you even asked me these questions early in our interview about my own journey and what was difficult, for example, in my personal growth as an individual, my childhood, and I shared some of that. When I have a sense of compassion for myself, and then I realize that it will be valuable for me to have that sense of compassion for others, it elevates the conversation for everyone. And it's as simple as asking someone like you did, what is your journey? What was painful in your journey? And how did you overcome that? How have you come to integrate some of the trauma or painful experiences you may have had earlier in your life? Not necessarily as a child, it could be in your early professional career. And when you have that resonance with others, like I can relate to that, that's kind of what it comes down to. I can relate to that. Then people start to really feel connected. And when they feel connected, then they are more engaged. And when they are more engaged, they're more willing to go even further in their performance, in their creativity. So it's like upping the ante on your connectivity with your team. And that leads to the last three, are the more advanced level, which is moving towards systems level leadership, right? And that fundamentally is about shifting from an I focused leader to a we focused leader. And the research into this area starts to look like distributed leadership or shared leadership, when you start to actually hand over some of the capacities for leadership to others, and you work with others side by side, more like partnering or sharing. Ultimately moving towards servant leadership, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, but it's probably one of the more difficult and challenging ways of showing up as a leader, which is sort of leading from the back, letting other people step forward and you're in service. And then ultimately transformational leadership, which is sort of combining all of the above and focusing on things like vision and inspiration and courage and collective transformation, where at the end of the day, the studies that we looked at for transformational leadership really zero in on innovation. Like if you really want to be able to reinvent yourself as a leader, reinvent your team, reinvent the system through difficult times, then the transformational leadership qualities become really important. So it is more sophisticated, it is challenging, it's a lifelong journey, but if you're able to demonstrate some level of vulnerability and humanity, which is the compassionate leadership, then it's not that much of a leap to empower, coach, and develop others to lift up their leadership capabilities. And I'll leave you with one punchline around this 9, which is that if you get to a place where you're comfortable thinking of yourself as a servant or a transformational leader, it's a lot less pressure on you because you're also relying on others. And that gets back to your original question to me about the heroic leader, which is when you do the heroic thing, it's all on your shoulders. And the old adage, it's lonely at the top, right? Well, it doesn't have to be like that. That's sort of the punchline. At the end of the day, if you become sophisticated in your approach to leading the system, you can call upon others to partner with you, to demonstrate the innovation, creativity, inspiration, to come up with a vision collectively. And then it's a we that's accomplishing the next goal for the organization.
This is so good. And I love how it just reminds me again of the Marshall Goldsmith quote that I had mentioned at the beginning, the name of one of his books. You what got you here won't get you there.
Right.
But I'm going to put a but on the end of that, because when you read The Science of Leadership and you're learning about these capabilities, and that you as a leader are working on these one at a time, and remember, doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
But when you are intentional about growth and about really putting the effort in to work through these 9 capabilities, you can get there, right? You can get there.
Absolutely.
And
Yep.
I really appreciate what you said, that in your experience, anyone can actually learn these and become a more effective leader. Such a great conversation and such an amazing topic. So as we are wrapping up our conversation today, I would love to have a conversation with you for hours, because there's so much knowledge in there that we have not gotten to, but that allows us the opportunity to reconnect at a later date.
I look forward to it.
Absolutely. But I've got one ask and then one final question to you. And I'm going to start with my ask. I would love it if you would give all of us, including me, a challenge. What is one thing that you would challenge us to do starting immediately?
I mean, I think the source of my success in my life, and I'm very grateful to work at Harvard, to have published books, to be, a successful coach. But my success lies in my connections with others, in my network. And I don't mean network in a light-hearted sort of LinkedIn kind of way. I mean real connections. So if you were going to ask me to suggest to people one thing that they could do that could transform their lives, get out and help other people. Look for where you can make a contribution and make a direct connection with others. Because, I volunteered for the Institute of Coaching. I went to a conference. I thought, these people are really cool. How do I get involved? How do I get to know them? And the way to do that was to reach out and say, can I help? And now I'm the executive director and a faculty at Harvard. I mean, I didn't set that goal. I just knew that I wanted to work with those people and I wanted to be connected to them. And so, yeah, reach out, connect. More than just a LinkedIn, because we all get that, do your networking thing and all that. But really look at where you connect with people and see where you can help.
That is so good. Such a great challenge. And here's my final question to you. Okay. So what is one of the most valuable, unexpected lessons that you learned from a client of yours? An unexpected lesson.
Oh, wow. Great question. Unexpected lesson. I think I've been amazed at how many of my clients have taken lemons and turned them into lemonade in ways that I would never have imagined. When you asked me the question, what popped into my head was an extremely unhappy executive that I worked with who, in some ways against my coaching a little bit, I was trying to help this individual become more successful in their corporate career. Mm-hmm. And they basically turned around and said, no, I think I want to go be an olive farmer in a different country.
Wow.
And what amazed me about that was realizing that this individual could completely reinvent their life in a completely different domain and be equally successful and happier. So I guess I would say I learned from that not to limit the scope of what's possible with my clients or with any leader that I'm working with. Like, if you want to make a transformational change and wake up in a vineyard in Italy and you can figure out a way to do it. So like the coaching changed dramatically, because instead of wanting to be the senior vice president of whatever, this individual wanted to own vineyards or olive trees. And so we had to figure out coaching for how do I make that happen? How do I get enough money together to be able to learn Italian and move to Italy? And I have to say that I was originally like, really? Is that even possible? My hesitance. But the punchline is that individual did exactly that and has been incredibly happy and successful. So
Wow.
Don't underestimate what is possible, I guess, is what I would say is the amazing learning for me.
Yeah.
From my own clients.
Don't limit yourself. That
Right?
is such a great one. And also your ability to adapt and be and agility in shifting the focus of your coaching, right? Because you were focused in one area, but then you
Right.
had to change and shift. And I really, I love that too. That's a great, what an inspiring story. So, Jeff, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. What a fantastic, wide-ranging conversation. Thank you for pulling back the curtain, for sharing, for your candor, and really for allowing the conversation to go in a multitude of different directions. I'm grateful for you, and I appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity. I love your questions. And I think that you're doing something that's really, really valuable for the listeners and for the people out there that are trying to grow as leaders. So kudos to you as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And for all of you, I want to thank you so very much for tuning in, for listening. And I do have a quick favor. Would you take just a moment to please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That helps us expand our reach and attract amazing guests just like Jeff. And to listen to more podcasts, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button. And until next time, my friends, keep learning and growing. Make sure that you run to pick up a copy of The Science of Leadership. Make sure that you not only read it, but actually take action on what you learn. And we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.